We continue today with the book of Shoftim, the book of Judges. We're into chapter 17. Yesterday, we concluded the fascinating and problematic and intriguing story about Shimshon, Samson, the warrior, the prophet of war, as Rav Steinsaltz calls him. The person on the one hand is a Nazir, but on the other hand seems to spend much of his time with Philistine women. And that's part of what's happening in this book, where we are constantly going from great leadership into lesser leadership. Yiftach, Shimshon, we don't see that peace has been given, and we are up to now the 17 chapters, and there are two stories that remain in this book, in the book of Shoftim. And just one thing that we should note, according to classical commentary starting by Rashi, that these last two stories are not the last two episodes chronologically that take place in the book, but rather they're here at the end of the book because we're trying to make a point about a lack of central leadership, and we will see that come up. And the theme, the words that are used at times in these last chapters, we'll see them in verse 6 coming up. So let's begin the chapter. Vayhi ish mehar Ephraim ushmo Michiyahu. There was a man from the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah. We know that a lot of the action in the book of Shoftim has been with the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, back with Gidon. The people of Ephraim not happy with him. He didn't call them out to war. Manasseh with Yiftach as well. Ephraim gets upset at Manasseh. That doesn't end so well. So we continue here again. There's a lot of stuff that's going on with these Bnei Yosef, with the descendants of Joseph here from the tribe of Ephraim. Vayomer le'imo. And he says to his mother, so nice, he talks to his mother, Elef umeha hakesef asher lukach lach, va'at alit v'gam amart ba'oznai hine hakesef iti, ani lekachti, v'tomer imo, baruch b'ni la'Hashem. So apparently the backstory here is that his mother, Michiyahu's mother, had 1,100 shekels of silver that were stolen. And then his mother went and said, whoever stole that money, curse that person. And so he's now scared of the curse of the guy in front of God. And so he says, that 1,100 shekels that were stolen, by the way, I have the silver. I took it, and he's giving it back to her, which is, you should know, a mitzvah. There's a mitzvah when you stole something to return it back to the person. You should return the stolen object. It's a hard thing to do, but the Torah is always very interested in people doing tshuva and people repenting, people coming back. And thus, you stole money, but there is a way to fix it by returning that money. So he does do something decent here in the return. It doesn't seem that he's doing it because he's desires to do mitzvot, but more he's scared of this curse. And his mother's response is, may my son be blessed by God. By Yashev et Elef ha'umea hakesef limo, so he returns the silver. Vatomer imo hakdei shikdashti et hakesef la'Adonai miyadi livni la'asot pesel u'masecha vata ashivenu lach. But his mother says, I consecrate the silver to God. I'm giving it to you, my son, to go and make a pesel u'masecha, to go and make an image, a molten image, something that's prohibited to us back in the Aseret HaDibrot. So is she saying this for God? A moment ago she said, Baruch b'ni la'Hashem, is this supposed to be an idolatrous thing? And now I'm returning this money. Go and make this idol towards God. Is masecha, is the word that's used by the Egel Hazav, by the golden calf. The associations here don't sound very good. Vayashav et hakesef limo. So when he gave the money back, vatikach imo ma'atayim kesef vatitneu litzorev. So his mother takes 200 of the shekel silvers, silver shkalim. Remember, they're 1,100. She takes 200 of them. Vatitnehu litzorev, and she gives it to a silversmith. And he makes some sort of sculpted image. Again, we don't know if this is idolatry, if it's akin to idolatry. Is it something you're supposed to worship? It doesn't seem so great, and it's in his house. It's certainly something that's prohibited in the Torah. But now we see it gets bad. Now Micha had made a house of God. Again, here you could look at it either way. It's a house of God. It's a way of turning to God. Baruch b'ni la'Hashem. Or is this a house of idolatry? Let's keep going. Vayas ephod utrafim. He makes, these are right, the vessels of garments of the Kohen Gadol, of the Kohanim. He makes for them also the word trafim. Trafim is what Rachel stole from Lavan. Lavan says to Yaakov, why'd you steal my trafim, my idols, or whatever they might be, my rabbit's foot? Rachel denies it, right? She refuses to get off of her camel. She says that she has her period, she's menstruating, she can't get off, and thus he can't find them. And here is a secondary place, and we'll see a third place where these trafim are found in the families of the descendants of Rachel. And so what does he do? Micha, he's got his own Beit Elohim. He doesn't need the temple, the Mishkan in Shiloh. Later, the Beit HaMikdash will be in Yerushalayim. He doesn't need those things. He's got his own house of love and prayer, and he makes one of his sons into a Kohen. Amazing thing to do. I thought you were a Kohen if your father was a Kohen. Well, here you can become a Kohen if your father makes you a Kohen. And then we have the phrase that I was referring to when we began. Bayamim hahem Elimelech b'Yisrael, ish hayashar be'einav ya'aseh. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did as he pleased. Now, in some ways, sounds like Americans, freedom, right? We have to have freedom. Everybody should be able to do what we want. But that's not the way the phrase is being used here. The phrase is not being used here as complimentary, as sometimes it is and can be seen that way. It's great that people have the freedom to make choices. We're not slaves. Here it's saying anarchy. There's nobody to police this. How can a member of Bnei Yisrael make their own house of idolatry? How can a person, Bnei Yisrael, decide that somebody else, not from a descendant of Aaron, is going to be a Kohen, is going to serve as a priest? How is it that a boy is stealing the money of his mother? And here we're not talking about taking $10 from her wallet, from her pocketbook. We're talking about taking 1,100 coins of silver. But there is no melech, there's no central authority, there's no leadership, there's nobody who is guiding Bnei Israel, and therefore making sure that there are laws, that there is peace, that we're living in a functional society. And now we go on that section, stage 1 of the story. Vayihi, now we continue verse 7 with stage 2. Vayihi nar me Beit Lechem Yehuda mi mishpachat Yehuda v'hu Levi v'hu Garsha. So there was a young man from Bethlehem, who was from the tribe of Yehuda. This young man was a Levite who lived in the Bethlehem area. He was a Levi, Levium, 48 cities that they lived in all over the both sides of the Jordan River, and this Levi was living in the Bethlehem, Beit Lechem area. Vayelech ha'ish me'ha'ir me'Beit Lechem Yehuda lagur ba'asher yimtza. And the man left Bethlehem, and he was going to go find a new place to live. He didn't have work, whatever it was, and so he's looking for a new place to live. Vayavo har Ephraim, and so he comes from the territory of Judah to the territory of the tribe of Ephraim. Ad Beit Micha la'asot darko. On his way, he comes and he ends up in the house of Micha, this gentleman mentioned earlier, with his idol from the money which he had initially stolen from his mother. He has his own Kohen, and Micha sees him, and Micha asks him, nice guy, see somebody new in shul, asks him a question, Marmelo Micha. Me'ayin tavo. Micha says, where are you coming from? Vayomer alav, Levi Anochi. He says, I am a Levite. Mi Beit Lechem Yehuda. I lived in Bethlehem. Vanochi olech lagor b'asher emtza. And I'm going to live wherever I find a place. And again, here, there's a lack of not saying that people shouldn't or couldn't move around, but the fact he's not doing that which the Levium were told to do. You're going to be in different cities. You're going to guide Bnei Yisrael there. And this guy is traveling around and looking for a place. He doesn't have a home. Vayomer lo Micha, shvai madi. Micha, like Abraham Avinu, right? He says, come and live with me. But however, v'hayali la'av ulechohen. He's going to demote his son because he says, you're going to be like a father to me, a guide, and you will be my priest. V'anochi ateilach aseret kasef liamim ve'erech begadim u'michiyatecha vayelech halevi. And I'll pay you 10 shekels of silver a year. I'll give you money for clothing, for your food. And the Levi says, sounds good. Vayoel halevi lashevet et ha'ish. And the Levi agreed to stay with the man. Vayihi anar lo ke'achad mibanav. And the youth, this young Levi, became like one of his sons. So at first he says to him, you'll be like a father to me. Now he's young, so he's like a son to him, but meaning he's getting wonderful treatment. This word vayoal, which we don't have too often in the Tanakh, is used by Moshe. When Moshe says he's going to stay at the house of Yitro, similar language is being used. So we see here some sort of strange, is there a connection with Moshe? Vayimaleh, continue in verse 12, Vayimaleh Micha et Yad HaLevi, and Micha inducts the Levi, Vayhilo Anar Lichohein, and he gets a bump up. It's like when you don't have a Kohen in shul and the Levi gets Aliyah number 1, which they do in certain shuls. You don't have to do it. So this, there's no Kohen here, no real Kohen. So the Levi gets bumped up. He is now the Kohen. He is the priest. Vayhi Beit Micha, in the house of Micha. Vayomer Micha, Ata Yadati, Ki Yetiv Adonai Li, Ki Hayali Halevi Lechohen. And Micha says, now I know that God is with me, that I will prosper, that things will be good, because I have this Levi and he has become my priest. And so Micha sees this event, the fact that a Levi ended up in his house, who was looking, searching for jobs, searching for work, searching for meaning, searching for a place to be home, ends up in his house, is fortuitous, it's from God, and it must mean that he will prosper. I'm just going to read to point it out. We'll continue with it tomorrow anyway, but if you look, the first phrase of chapter 18 again, Vayamim Ahem Ein Melech B'Yisrael. In those days, there was no king of Israel. And that's, you could say that that's sort of bookending what we just had here. The Levi is a Kohen, the thievery, the sort of the lying in a sense to your mother, the idolatry or akin to idolatry, the creating of garments like the Kohanim wore, which are only reserved for the Kohanim. And it's also going to be an introduction to the beginning of the next chapter, which is going to take our story. What's going to happen to this Levi? What's going to happen to Micha? What's going to happen to his wonderful idols? What's going to happen to his house of love and prayer and God worship? And that we will continue tomorrow. But what we know is it's not going to end up well, because it is anarchy. There's no rule of law. There's no sheriff in town. And without a sheriff, anybody can do what they want. And what we're doing here, and we'll conclude with this remark, is we are building towards the idea that if you don't have a king, that things will not go well. We need a king to unify the people. We need a king to have a country that works together well, and there is no king. And instead, what we have in these stories is a complete lack of respect for the laws of God, and a complete lack of respect for the laws between a human being and another human being. And something is going to need to happen in order to change and let Bnei Israel move in a different direction.